This week, we're looking at different uses of virtual reference in the library. I want to talk a little bit about social media and library and information studies and a critical approach to social media. So I'm going to talk about how libraries are using social media and this idea of a critical approach. Library and information studies workspaces as well as social media technologies are changing faster than ever, giving us new opportunities to engage community and patrons. Concurrently, social media is increasingly proving to be a place where politics and identity is located, as well as where social change takes place. So, I want to talk about and think about how a critical approach to social media might benefit us in reference services and especially reference virtual services. For this lecture, I want to examine the current conversations around libraries and social media, talk about taking a critical approach to social media, and look at examples of critical social media in library and information studies. So right now, there's sort of a working definition of social media, and that just indicates that social media is sort of always under this state of flux and change. Social media right now is defined as the means of interaction among people in which they create, share, and exchange information and ideas in virtual online communities and networks. So originally, communications really started through this sort of one-way medium. So you had the television or the radio, and the person communicating was talking at the audience. But now with social media and these virtual services, we really have a two-way collaboration of generating and creating information. This means that the audience or the patrons are in conversation and creation of information. This social media shifted internet users from an audience to producers and makers. And so now we really have this idea of the patron as not only a user of information, but really a producer and a maker of information. So we see this trend of maker spaces happening more often. And this really comes from this shift of two-way collaboration. There's this idea of media convergence that is popular in communication studies, and this just alters the relationship between existing technologies, industries, markets, genres, and audiences. So previously, we might have had a reference as a person-to-person, in-person service, but now we're going to have it online through different media platforms. Our users can access reference through their phones, right? And their phones are also their computers, and their phones are also their cameras. So this is essentially what media convergence means. It's really that now these various technologies and tools are all happening on one device, and this one device acts as multiple mediums. So we see a large social media shift, especially within the library. Right now, research shows that 86% of libraries are actively using social media. The top two platforms among the libraries using social media are Facebook at 99%, Twitter at 56%, and Pinterest gaining ground at 30%. And the libraries are using social media in a variety of ways. A recent study by the publishers Taylor and Francis looked at over 600 libraries worldwide. They found that 61% of the libraries they surveyed have been using social media for 3 years or more. 30% of those libraries posted to social media daily, and interestingly, 25% of libraries have more than 5 individuals in their staff updating their social media page. Among those libraries, Facebook is the most popular social media channel. Social media is an added labor for LIS professionals. So often it's not necessarily in a librarian's contract that they will be working with social media, but really, frequently, this is a part of their daily job tasks. Also interesting to libraries is that 72% of libraries have no social media policy in place. So, although libraries are using social media frequently, there's not necessarily a policy on how to approach that. So, right now, there's more and more research happening around the use of social media in libraries. Now, what Scott Young and Dorlin Rossman found in their article, Building Library Community Through Social Media, was that most frequently libraries were using social media for broadcast based promotion and marketing. And this was usually done through Facebook. So, really, libraries were using social media as a sort of public relations tool. And you might think of this in terms of reference as a way of displaying and broadcasting your reference materials and also your services within reference. So this is what libraries are doing is they're sort of making their social media audience or users or friends, as Facebook would say, they are letting them know those reference services that are available through Facebook and through Twitter. What Young and Rawson argue is that libraries really need to focus on fostering and building community rather than simply broadcasting. So, what this means is that libraries haven't actually completely taken advantage of the tools of social media. But Young and Rossman, um, in their own sort of excavation of how libraries were using this, found an interesting analysis on the social media tool Twitter. And they found that libraries, especially, can increase patrons' use and sort of interaction with librarians through Twitter as a conversation instead of through broadcasting. What Young and Rossman promote is that libraries need to articulate and realize their social media programs intentionally, and they can plan and foster a community with two-way interaction. So rather than this broadcast based approach to social media, they want to really bring in just like a virtual chat and virtual reference, a two-way interaction with the library patron. Young and Rossman found that libraries are really able to build community, especially through Twitter. And there's a lot of opportunities for social media to strengthen the library's ties with communities. Here are some examples of libraries using social media really well. And I'm also going to look at a sort of sub program of libraries. First, there's the New York Public Library. The New York Lab, the NYPL has anywhere from 10 to 15 staff members, and they're all contributing as extra duties in addition to their job descriptions. So social media is not necessarily in their job description, they're all participating. NYPL uses Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, Google, YouTube, Pinterest, and e newsletters as a part of their interactions. And they have tens of thousands of users in their Facebook page alone. The Columbus Metropolitan Library also uses social media, and there was an interesting study done on their library use of social media. They went from 3,500 Facebook followers to 28,000 followers by basically creating a guided plan of action on their social media that was agreed upon by all staff to connect their libraries with their audience. Finally, there's this group called the Libraries Incubator Project. Now, the Libraries Incubator Project It's basically a project done originally by Library and Information Studies students um, to demonstrate how artists are using libraries to generate and create art, or writers or poets. So, how the library serves as an incubator of art. They created um, this whole website on a WordPress, and they really use Twitter, Pinterest, and Tumblr to generate interest and discussion. So, social media was sort of used as their tool, really, to create and generate this discussion around libraries. So just apply this in your own sort of local region. How do you see your own libraries engaging social media? Are they promoting reference materials? Are they using social media as a sort of virtual chat tool? Do they mostly broadcast, or do they create community and engage in critical discussions? Now I want to look at social media and taking a critical approach to social media. So, why do we need to consider social media for libraries, and why take a critical approach? Libraries are increasingly using social media to reach their communities. However, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and other social media outlets, just like all other technologies, are not necessarily value free, but socially constructed. So, taking a critical approach means staying mindful of these various dynamics while also engaging and using social media tools to the library's advantage. We start with this concept of the social construction of technology. Now, the social construction of technology really just looks at technology as embedded and created with its surrounding practices and dynamics of power. It basically says that technological things have political qualities. In this approach, we look at technology and social media as artifacts. So rather than approaching technology as neutral and value free, we acknowledge that things like Facebook, Twitter, and these various platforms might have a politic or a bias to them. Langdon Winner, who's a communication scholar, really put forth this idea of the social construction of technology, and he uses the example of the hanging bridge. Um, this low hanging bridge, was designed by architect Robert Moses, and it's a part of Long Island. These low bridges in Long Island were commissioned by Robert to be designed by Robert Moses across parkways into the leisure areas of the island, including famous beaches. This bridge was designed effectively to prevent public buses from going to these leisure beaches. So they limited access to upper and middle class New Yorkers who owned cars. This is just a really rudimentary example of how technology can be embedded with power politics and how we need to be aware of that. So, when we use new medias in library studies, we have to consider these sort of power dynamics going on, not only from the top up, the producers of those technologies, such as Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, but also as the audience or user or maker, as these technologies shift into sort of the maker's hands. One way to look at this is by looking at identity and how it's circulated online. So, when the internet was originally starting to be used by the public, anonymity was a very popular way of talking about online identities. So, people could go online and be anonymous, right? There wasn't necessarily the same power in politics as the physical world, because there was the potential for everyone to sort of be anonymous. But really, the shift in talking about media and communications and social media has gone to acknowledging that the same politics and power that circulates in the physical world happens online and in the digital spaces. So, Sophia Noble, who we read earlier this semester, says that digital spaces reproduce old hierarchies in new forms. And we saw that when she discussed Google and the way Google represents Black girls and Black women. Um, we also might see that these technologies can be technologies of gender. So they might reproduce also and circulate former ideas around gender. One example of this was these sort of studies that looked at how Google or various search engines generated search results based on their algorithms. So when you type in women need to in a Google search engine or a Yahoo search engine, it's going to generate what's typed in the most frequently by the most users. And what that was for a while last year was women need to be put in their place. Women need to know their place. Women need to be controlled, as this example shows. So, we have to sort of look at these social media tools, these various digital tools, as generating the same power in politics that circulates in real life. And we just need to be cautious and aware of that as we use these tools in virtual reference. Another example in the way that class and race and gender is organized through social media platforms is by looking at the demographics used in social media. Um, a study by Microsoft researcher Dana Boyd found that high school students described the difference between the social media platform MySpace and Facebook. They described these differences with racially and classist overtones. In a 2009 NPR story, they found that elite students from Silicon Valley were describing MySpace as trashy, though most of the young people using MySpace were actually kids of color. So, in this demographics chart, we don't even actually have MySpace polled by the Pew Research Center. But what these organizations and studies, Microsoft and the and NPR found was that um, many kids of color were still using MySpace frequently. So social media was organized by race. We also might find this for gender. So, a large portion of women are using Pinterest in 2015, 44%, and a smaller percentage of men, 16%. Um, so, we also see more women were using Facebook in 2015. It's just important to be cautious of the demographics in thinking about how we're going to use different virtual services to know who is out there, who can be reached through virtual services, and who might be missing out altogether. One drastic demographic I think we have is if you look at the demographic of 65 and up and how low those numbers are compared to the rest of the percentages of population. So those patrons who are 65 and up might really be missing out on these various virtual services that the library is offering if they're not on these platforms at all. So one thing to think about, does your library consider race, gender, sexuality, class, and age demographics when they're using social media to provide virtual reference services? And another question that might come up is this idea around diversity, a distraction from a more deeper engagement when talking about race and power issues. So rather than talking about diversity, we might want to think about how really race and racism is happening through these different tools. And does our libraries manifest colorblind ideologies in not looking at these social media tools? These are some questions that we might generate and ask ourselves as we sort of look at social media tools in the library. Just want to talk quickly about some critical discussions happening in library and information studies. So, one of these platforms is FemTechNet. FemTechNet is a consortium of feminist media scholars around the United States who discuss how to use media, social media, um, with feminist sort of agendas or analysis. Now, library information studies students around the country actually participate in FemTechNet classes. And one thing unique to FemTechNet is this idea of wiki storming. Library and information studies students are participating in Wikipedia editing, especially from this gendered perspective, because Wikipedia editors tend to be overwhelmingly male. So FemTechNet promotes this wiki storming events where women and feminist identified people come together and edit and um, contribute to Wikipedia from a feminist perspective. Another example of social media use is the Ferguson Public Library. In 2014, Michael Brown was shot by police Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, and the Ferguson Public Library made a very public statement by staying open during the protests and clashes with police. The message was spread widely through Twitter, and the director of the Ferguson Public Library, Scott Bonner, even did a Reddit Ask Me Anything in November 2014 with over 1,400 comments. So, social media in this case was really used to promote the library as a safe space during this time of social unrest. And really, the library became very known through social media. And finally, we have hashtag CritLib, which our class has looked at throughout the semester. This is a Twitter conversation that happens around critical library uses and sort of approaches by librarians. So in this conversation, I looked at the trends around libraries and social media, looked at why it's important to take a critical approach to social media, and some critical conversations in library and information studies.